sure that the live streaming is on. Can we start? I guess that we can. Okay, let's start. So welcome to this session. And this session is about mostly women entrepreneurship and the involvement of women, and what is has been done at policy level and what needs to be done. So why is this important? I see that it's mostly women here, so probably you already know, but I think that it's important to put things in perspective. And you know, there's been a lot of research about the involvement of women in innovation. And there is a report from the last year from McKinsey that says that if we boost more equality in innovation, by 2025, we would increase the growth between 12 and 28 trillion dollars. That would correspond basically to the financial size of the US and China together. So this has a big impact on the economy, right? And there are other studies made by the Harvard Business School where they check the skills of women entrepreneurs and they compare, let's say, their measure to men. And what I found is that when they look at leadership skills, teamwork, innovation, and problem solving, women usually outperform men in all of these. The only thing where men outperform women, it seems, it's sales. For the rest, women entrepreneurs are outperforming men. Nonetheless, if we look at a few more numbers, you'll see that 30% of women, entrepreneurs in Europe are women, but they only receive 2% of the financing. And this was before the pandemic, because after the pandemic, it dropped to 1%. And only 4% of venture capitals have a female majority, and only 0.5% of them are led by women. So with these numbers, you can see how important it is to actually put in practice new policies at European level. And last July, the Commission published a new European Agenda for Innovation, where they identified many actions. Among them, there are also actions to support women entrepreneurship. In my opinion, it's not really clear what the Commission is going to do. These actions are kind of very vague, and there are not concrete numbers on also on how much it will be invested in that. And with this discussion, we would like to kind of pinpoint a few things that we consider are important for policymakers to implement new policies. Now, our panelists are involved in innovation entrepreneurship at different levels, so there is a different degree of involvement. We will hear from their direct experience. They will also bring us some numbers, more numbers than I just mentioned, and they will also propose some ideas on how to improve the involvement of women in innovation in Europe. Now, we start with Maria Gorna. Maria, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Maria Gorna. I'm a research group leader at the University of Warsaw. I'm also a former MCAA board member. And my involvement in this topic comes also from the fact that I'm a woman in research, and but I was also working part-time as an expert for a pharmaceutical company for 2.5 years. And I'm awarded L'Oréal UNESCO Women in Science Scholarship. So in a way, programs directed at women are close to my heart. Right, so that's about me.
Sorry, thank you, Maria, very quick. Jeroen, would you like to introduce yourself?
I wasn't sure about the order, so I was waiting for my turn. Thank you all. I hope you can hear me well. These microphones are a little bit odd, but we'll make it work. My name is Jeroen van Lent. I'm not involved in MCAA. I'm actually here as a board member of the EIT alumni. The EIT is the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, and we try to create this ecosystem in Europe that fosters innovation and creates more startup companies, eventually, finally, to sort of be able to compete with Silicon Valley and other major players. So this is a little bit what we do. The EIT alumni, as an association, we are similar to MCAA, where we gather graduates from our programs and so on. So this is the background that I represent and the people that we have in our community. Personally, I have a background in the very male-dominated IT world. So my bachelor was, I think, a great example of non-gender balance, so to say. We had 100% male in my bachelor, which was not at all good. I think not something that we aim for. I have seen this getting better over the years, though. Having participated later in a master program that was funded by the EIT, the percentages got better. Of course, still a long road ahead, so this is something we will be talking about. Yeah, and I think the rest of the points we can keep for a little bit later.
Thank you, Jeroen. Nehama?
Hi. My name is Nehama Lewis. I'm also a former board member of MCAA prior to the pandemic. I work in academia. I'm a professor at the University of Haifa and vice dean of the Faculty of Social Science. My interest in this topic also stems from being a member of a consortium on gender equity in research and technology, in which we have an amazing network of mostly women, obviously, from around Europe and other countries. And we ran focus groups and hackathons specifically to promote the issue of greater inclusion and opportunities for women in the technology sector. So having done that in Israel and also having heard from the other 22 countries, there are certain clear challenges and also potential for improvement. So the topic is important.
Thank you, Nehama. And then Sara?
Thank you. So my name is Sara Ricardo. I was also a former MCAA board member. And I am now a consultant, but I have a very decade-long roles in academia. I was a junior group leader and then eventually moved to consultancy. And what we do in consultancy is precisely, we consult for non-profit organizations, so for higher education foundations, governments, funders, and it's precisely to give quantitative and qualitative analyses to provide better arguments to decision makers, precisely to make better policies, changes in policies, or new design of new policies. So these subjects is interesting to me for two reasons. One, because it is something that I also see in my work. This is something that it's needed, and we need to do better analysis and better policies in many circumstances. And then also personally, I'm in the board of my company. I am very, very lucky that I am in a company that is very keen on actually having a diverse board. But I know, and it's interesting to see on our daily decisions, how that diversity is beneficial, but is also challenging. And I think it's something that I would also like to bring to the discussion, because this diversity is harder to achieve in decision making than if you only have one vision. But it is absolutely necessary, and we find that it's really, really helpful to create the company and create the organization that we are creating. And so that's mainly the reason why I'm here. I think I can give a bit of idea of what's also needed and it's still lacking in terms of devising new strategies on this topic, and what are the main barriers that we are seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. So I would like now to kind of deep dive into the problems and understand what are the barriers nowadays for women to kind of make this step ahead, okay? And Maria, would you like to start, please?
Sure. So now let me be a little bit more expansive on what I want to say. So I would like to present to you some facts that come out from a survey conducted in Poland by our biggest basic research funding agency, National Science Center Poland. And I think it is very much telling of what motivates or discourages women who are in research. And I still think I'm still mostly doing basic research, and I think this is also where the female entrepreneurship in tech starts with. So let's start with how women and men are likely or not to apply for research funding, also in leadership positions, and what are the main reasons. And first of all, when there were about 6,000 respondents to this survey, when it comes to reasons why they did apply for research funding, there's almost no difference between men and women. Mostly they care about continuing their career and their research and to tackle a research problem. Really, this is striking that there are no differences there of like what motivates men and women, and they're equally eager to lead projects if it was up to them. However, the biggest differences are seen in the numbers given the reasons given by men and women for why they did not apply for any research funding. And in both cases, the main reason is that they feel that their track record is not strong enough. So basically, their CV, their accomplishments would not be enough to guarantee funding. But in this case, 37% of men think so, and 59% of women. So 60% of women thought that they were not good enough to apply. And the next reason is the lack of faith in their success, which is very much connected. And here, 26% of men thought so, and 43%, so double that, 40% of women lacked faith in their success. Also among less frequently mentioned reasons for why women did not apply for funding were, for example, lack of time because of family chores and like care, so family reasons. And here, it was 13% of men, but 26%, so exactly double that, women. Obviously, these are very so these are very commonly thought reasons. Some of them may be less frequently mentioned, usually, are that women felt that they received less support from their host institution. They were also less encouraged to apply. And they felt like they lack information about the funding schemes. And these were also maybe twofold differences between women and men. And lastly, there was also a question about the main reason why researchers would prefer to be an employee in the project instead of leading the project. And of course, the main reason for both men and women were that they want to avoid all the bureaucratic administrative work. 81% of men gave this as the reason why they would not like to lead the project, 69% of women. But then the next reason, which was again lack of faith in their own sort of track record, 50% of women felt so and 39 men. The next reason why people did not want to be leaders of the project was equally mentioned by both men and women. It was that they would like to have less responsibility. So obviously it's independent of the gender how much responsibility you would like to have or not. So women and men are equally prone to take on responsibility. However, 31% of women did not want to be leaders because of family reason, and only half of that was the case for men. And the last reason was whether they would be unwilling to lead a team. That was equal for both genders. So to summarize this, I would think that women in research basically lack confidence, and it's also connected to either real or perceived lack of support from their environment. And perhaps compounded on this is the fact that they are burdened with a little bit more, or maybe more in general, duties at home. So connected to family reasons. So that would be my take on this.
Thank you, Maria. And do you think that this is due to the fact that the entire system is mostly male-dominated and also kind designed on the, let's say, way of doing things or competing that usually is from men?
Now, unsupported by numbers, my personal opinion would be that women from the early on are very much trained to be perfect, and they get good grades, and sort of they score themselves. They evaluate themselves by some kind of external scores. And once you get into like a research track, it's really very hard to find objective criteria for evaluation. So they look down on themselves because they don't feel like they have hard proof that they have accomplished something. And one reason why, for example, Marie Curie individual fellowships are so important is that once you receive a kind of like an award or a fellowship, you feel like finally you're validated. And I think women need this kind of sort of validation marks a bit more to bring up their courage and self-confidence. It also shows that once they believe in themselves a bit more, the success rate is not any less than in the case of men. And for example, I don't remember if there was research done in Australia or in the US, and it was an English-speaking country, that showed that the success rate for the first big grant was the same for men and women, but with the second research grant, suddenly the success rate dropped. And I think this is where it catches up with them the second reason, so that they spend more time on other duties and they cannot fully focus on the research problem as much as men can. So in a way, the first wave of sort of applications and becoming leaders is very much dependent on self-confidence, and I think later on in the course of the research track, other reasons catch up to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This reminds me that a few years ago, let's say around 10 years ago, Google launched a project, because as you know, Google is plenty of engineers and people from IT, and from what we heard, there are not many women there. But also what they found out is that there were few women progressing like in the career ladder. And so they started a project to understand what was happening, and actually the main causes were exactly lack of confidence and the fact that they had like some family duties more than the men. So the solution that they found out was to kind of provide more support to women and also kind of train them about, asking for a pay raise. Just the simple things, because men are not shy to ask for a pay raise even if they are not really good at what they do, while women, as Maria said, if they are not really good at it, they wouldn't ask for it. And the same was like, supporting women with kids or with other caring responsibilities with some external support. And after a few years, actually the numbers increased a lot. So they had more women actually going to management position or leading teams and things like that. So these small interventions actually have very large effects eventually. Thank you, Maria. Then I would pass the floor to Nehama, and so you can tell us about the interviews that you run and your experience.
So I did a focus group with 4 extremely talented young women who were doing programming work, and they were really, really great at data science. And I asked them what their experience was. Had they faced any challenges? Did they see things changing? And I came out of it actually quite optimistic, in the sense that they were very aware of what they bring to the table. They were very confident in their skills. But they also described that they were sometimes an outlier, and that they had overcome structural issues before. So they said that in school, like, one of them had a conversation with a teacher who said, you should do this cyber course, you know, you're good at it. And before the teacher said anything, it didn't seem like something that she would do, because it was just boys in that program. So that completely changed the trajectory for her. But what they did say is that women in their 30s face particular headwinds, especially in tech and in the entrepreneurial world, because of childcare issues in many cases, the ability to move around, the amount of time you're expected to put in, especially if you're in high tech and you're a founder of a company. So they were exactly at that point in their careers where they were just moving from like late 20s to early 30s. They were aware of these issues, and each person separately, you know, was confident they would overcome it, but they acknowledged that many people don't. So after the focus group, I had a look at the VC world and where the money is, and at startups, and that was a lot less optimistic. So what I found is the people making the decisions about money and funding companies are largely men, but like the numbers of women are tiny, at least in Israel, and it is fairly depressing. So for example, C-level and management in the tech world is less than a quarter women. So women get in, and they're coders and they're data scientists, but the people at the decision-making level, they're 75% on average men. Only 9% of VC partners are women in Israel, which, you know, there are opportunities to get there, but clearly it's very, very difficult. And a lot of the money that is given by VCs is not to companies whose founders include women. And only 16.5% of partners in VC funds in Israel are women. And what I found also is that the US is no better in that sense. You see the same pattern. 65% of US VC funds have no female investment partner at all. So you could walk into a VC funding, you know, high-level meeting, and there would be just men. So when it's just men, there's no diversity of opinion, there's no representation, and the chance that they will fund women-led companies is lower statistically. So I think there's so many problems, but that's just one of them.
This is very striking, because one would think that independently of the gender, right, if the business opportunity for venture capital is good, they would invest, right? But if you look at the number, this doesn't happen. So it's belonging to the club sometimes it seems to be more important than actually having a business opportunity that is successful. Thank you, Nehama. Sara?
Yes, so those are exactly the numbers that I was going to comment. In fact, a bit the numbers that Marco commented and the numbers that you've been commenting, Nehama, because it is really very much a boys' club, and then of course there's very, very little VC funding that going for women. I want to talk also about one case and divide a bit this discussion in terms of the barriers on two parts. One is the path of, let's say, educating and retaining the women on the path for entrepreneurship, and then the consolidating the women that are already with women-led startups. And so I think from the point of view of women-led startups, those are, or that's companies, these are really facing difficulties in terms of funding and support, precisely because they are a very tiny minority in a very, very male-oriented world. And this male-oriented world, the big point for me here is that it's a male vision, and there's not necessarily anything necessarily wrong with that, but it is one vision. And there is one article that is very interesting that clearly shows that the motivations for women and the way they approach the problems is distinct from men. And so the way they approach, for example, the running and the leading of their companies is distinct. And why? Because they tend to be more collaborative and more altruistic, and sometimes perceived by men as being slower. And men have a tendency to like competition and be motivated by achievement. So what then that creates is that the men, and I've seen actually these, I was for a short period of time in a company in which the CEO is a woman, and I could see that actually happening. They are belittled. Women were very much belittled in these VC circles by men because they are considered incompetent. They were treated a bit like the blonde. She was blonde and pretty, and there was a lot of in very strong belittling and stereotyping. And so this doesn't help. And I think then from the side of the women, it's difficult to maintain this type of dynamic because they'll have to maintain themselves and consolidate their careers on these type of environments, and it's a struggle. So I think that is a main barrier on the side of consolidation. I also want to talk about one case that we do know from work that we've done with the Leiden University. Leiden University has a very strong entrepreneurial path and education. And in there, there was also clear that in the beginning, there were 50% of the women that get in the beginning incubation phase. And then as the program continues and as the program goes into actually the setup and the creation of startups and the startups on society, that number dropped from 50% to 20% of startups created women-led, to 10% of startups then in society. And this is in an institution that is aware of these issues and is trying to help women on the path to entrepreneurship. One thing that was discussed at the time, and I think is being tried, and we don't know yet if it's working, is that it was a lot related to the fact that they didn't feel that there was an empathic response to what they were trying to do, them as women. The case studies that were used were male, the trainers were male, and the whole vision was one vision, and it's the vision that Nehama was talking about. And I think the main barrier is exactly that, is this one vision. We can't have one way of doing entrepreneurship, we can have one way of approaching it, and we cannot have one style of leadership. And so this diverse and accepting that there are different ways of doing it would probably be very beneficial. I also want to add just two things, if I can, Marco, to a bit your examples of the positive impact that we are losing out on. So women, and this is a report from BCG, so women, when they are funded by these VC funds, they generate twice the return from investment. So when they get the money, they do amazingly well. And I think we need more of these studies. We need to track these things better, because it is really, we need to attack that stereotyping and discrimination that is existing. Because from the evidence that we have, this is not true. And I also want to point out one thing that sometimes we may not also realize, and this happens also in other fields, very close to me, for example, in clinical trials, is that we are also, when we have, say, 1% of companies that are being VC funded and they're all male, 99% are male, there's also a loss on the types of products that we put out. And this has been also seen very clearly with innovation products on women's health, for example. So men don't normally research nor develop their companies nor try to develop women's health products. And so we will lose out on a number of innovation products on a certain topic just because men will not address it. And so this has been shown, and there's a nice initiative called Femtech Lab that actually is trying to address this issue by having a network of women addressing women's health issues, like cervical cancer, contraceptions, whatnot. So these are some of the points that I wanted to also bring to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's clear that having diversity is very important, diversity of views and also diversity of representation in general. And what you said about the fact that the return on investment is higher, actually, it reminded me that, you know, when you have the microcredit, I don't know if you remember that, but a few years ago, the Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to the person who invented the microcredit, meaning in developing countries, they were given very small loans, and those loans are always given to women because they knew that women are more reliable to pay the loans back rather than men. Okay, and now, Jeroen.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think the fellow panelists have done a very good assessment of the situation, and it's difficult for me to add to it. I mean, I have to say, listening to it and being pointed out there, as a male, it's kind of painful to listen to. I almost feel guilty, which it's not in my individual control either. But I think more people should probably feel like that and sort of wake up towards, you know, what is happening here. If I can bridge it a little bit maybe to what we can do and how we can overcome this and work towards, you know, a better world. I think the EIT and our EIT alumni community has always been very sort of involved in trying to overcome these challenges, to aim for more equality, make things more fair for everyone, so to say. And I think this is also included because you started off talking about the European Innovation Agenda. I think it's also included there. It could certainly be more concrete and there could certainly be more done. But if I look at what the ambitions are and what the EIT has committed to contribute to in the new European Innovation Agenda as well, I think there are good points, you know, towards upskilling, retraining people. There's lots of education elements that really push this to the next level, focusing on deep tech and deep science related topics where, you know, people should be trained and things should be improved. When I look at the rest of our ecosystem, I need to open my notes because there are a ton of examples of, you know, things that have been tried out. I heard some interesting feedback on the VC cycles, and this is something that within the EIT they have tried to sort of counter by closely mentoring people. Kind of sad, right? Going into the room with them to sort of make sure that this funding is secured. But in the end of the day, we do have a lot of women founders within the EIT community that are an example. And even if I look at the most successful ones, I think most of them are women in our case, maybe because men find their funding elsewhere. But it is a great intermediary achievement, so to say. I don't want to say at all that we have solved the problems and that, you know, things are already happening, but I want to give this sort of bit of hope that I think there is a transition happening that is somewhat going in the right direction. And, you know, as alumni, as ambassadors, I have the same feeling in MCAA, that everyone is super open-minded, super encouraging, you know, towards bringing this all together. So hopefully we can come up with some more, you know, nice ideas on how we can improve this. Sorry, Marco, to take over your moderation. But
no, it's fine, it's fine. No, and thanks a lot for all of you, all your interventions. Now, I would like to kind of switch gears. That we have identified many barriers, right? So the boys' club on the one side, the lack of diversity, and the difference in drivers and also in way of working and work ethics, whatever. Now, I would like each of you to kind of pick one of these, if you want, and propose some kind of concrete solution on how this can be overcome. Maria, would you like to start?
Right, so as before, I will start from the perspective of women who are in research, possibly a mix of basic research and applied research. Well, first of all, let's start with a utopia, and then come down to real life. Utopia would be that we changed research assessment criteria, and more than just hard numbers of like impact factors and citations, and are taken into evaluating researchers. So women tend to do much more sort of community service. They sit on many more committees, and especially that they are overburdened with other duties, it turns out to take away more from the time that they can dedicate to real research. Of course, this is difficult to do, but I think in the long term it would benefit everyone, also researchers who are not the sort of stereotypical, research types. I think everybody would benefit from being appreciated for awarding your time also to other aspects of doing science. In real life, I think this is a little bit difficult to achieve, and I would be advocating for mentoring programs for women, but also for example, such programs that this Laura UNESCO does, which is awarding female outstanding researchers in their respective fields. So this one is dedicated to life sciences, which is a little bit of a pity. And as a laureate, I have encountered sarcastic remarks from my male colleagues, like, "Oh, you need like L'Oreal, cosmetics, whatever." They sort of belittle this program. However, I think this did help to spark some kind of discussion to make them realize that yes, we still need programs dedicated to women, because not everyone is even aware that there is a bias out there. So maybe more programs that would award and mentor women towards leadership positions.
Thank you. And actually, when I was preparing this session, I read an article on the Journal of Entrepreneurship and Management. And one of the things that they mention is that having role models is very important. So these programs like these awards and similar programs actually help having role models and for other women to follow. And thank you, Maria. Nehama?
Yeah, so one thing I think would help in many areas is transparency, because I think that when decisions get made on an ad hoc basis, there's room to reach one decision, let's say to hire a male applicant over a female applicant, and you can justify that for whatever reasons, but if at the end of the day every year there are much fewer women hired into various positions, then you have a trend. So if some of the process were made more transparent, I think that people would feel more accountable for the decisions, and it would be a bit more obvious, and you could compare, for example, if you came out into the tech world and you're an engineer, it's very difficult to find out what the salary ranges are. I mean, you can go to Glassdoor or whatever and you know what the promotion expectations. But if companies had to give the public as well as applicants ranges that were for everyone, then I think it would go a long way into giving women the knowledge of where the gaps are, and then they could choose accordingly. And the same for promotion within companies. Instead of the problem being that men are more comfortable maybe asking for promotion and benefits, which is fine, it should be something that at any given point in your career, there's a path to promotion that isn't reliant on your initiative. Like, so if there are women who are not sure, then the system should indicate to you, now is the time for you to go out for promotion. So again, taking away from one woman against the system into the system actually has to share information, and then women can choose. And then eventually I think that will create more accountability and that will reduce gaps. That's one idea.
Thank you. It's a very nice idea. I see that there's a question over there. In just a second. We open for a question in a minute, okay? And I see that it's very difficult to enforce it, mostly for private companies, right? So, But for sure, at least in the public space, they should be realized. And there is actually the European Innovation Council that seems not to have transparency at all in the portfolio decisions. And actually, there is a call now because there is the midterm review of the Horizon Europe program, and one of the things that many organizations are asking for is for more transparency, also for that reason. I should say that I'm criticizing now the European Innovation Council, but actually they have a very good mentoring program for women, so let's say the two things balance out. Sara?
You asked one. Can I give one more than one? Because they're a bit linked. So I think one thing that may be needed, because I think there really is a lot of bias, some and very, very implicit bias, and many times the intentions, it can even be that the intentions are not bad, and there's not an awareness. So I think we need to educate very, very actively for spotting the bias. And also, I mean, it's interesting because we actually asked recently to do this, and I think these are coming more often, is things like the gender plans when you are making funding schemes, for example. So you have to be aware of what could be causing discrimination when you are setting up, for instance, funding instruments. So I think that can help very, very much, and that's especially for governmental or public funding that is possible to do, and that can directly affect and influence even not at the private level, because it's from the side of the funding. And then there's one thing that talking about transparency, and maybe it's because for me, everything needs to be evidence-based, because we need to prove to the people that this, you know, one, are the actions that we are planning and the policies that we are doing, are they working? And two, we need to be able to create this awareness and show to everyone that there is a loss that is happening or not a loss, or things are happening or not happening. And one thing that is very clear from even the European Commission is that there is no open, available data or information that we can and is transparent to the population and to the communities. And I think this is a bit inconsistent with the European Commission wanting to, you know, be involved in open science when their own data is not open. And I know that because I've tried to address some of these issues, and they just don't have open data. It's not available, it's not findable, and it's definitely not curated. And so that limits our ability to work together in trying to see if things are working and our policies are working. So I think that's important. I also want to bring a point here. I'm sorry, because I think this is important. This is looking at all of you. There's mainly women here. And I think this is an issue that we also have. We need much more allyship, and I think we need allyship programs. We need to bring the men into this equation. And I'm very happy that you're here and you're representative and you set up this. But this is not a women's issue. I mean, this is an everyone's issue. And I think if we don't bring the men, and if the men cannot come to this room, we have a problem. So the men were not interested to come here. So that means we still have to work on that.
This is a very good point. Hopefully they are online.
Hopefully.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I totally agree with the importance of educating on biases. And this is very tricky, sometimes can be very subtle. My own experience is that last year we organized a program at the University of Vienna around entrepreneurship. And we tried to make sure that there was gender balance everywhere. So from participants to trainers, to also the jury in the pitch. Actually, we had like a slight majority of women among participants, a slight majority of women among trainers, and a slight majority of women in the jury. And eventually, most of the teams, let's say the teams that were ranked best, were mostly men-dominated teams. Then we were a bit disappointed by this result because we were expecting more balance. And I got in touch with our Equal Opportunities Office at the university to ask for advice, and also to an organization called Female Founders in Vienna that supports women in starting companies. And both of them told me that we should have trained the trainer in preparing their content without biases, something that I wouldn't ever think about.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah, it's exactly the point. It's much more, and I think this is the step, you know, the steps ahead. It's much more than just having women in the room, because women themselves also have biases many times. So it is really on how you communicate, how you perceive, how you're trying to, you know, homogenize and uniformize everything, because you many times do not realize, but this happens. I'm going to tell you a story. This is from a friend of mine, but this was very recent. So big, you know, entrepreneurship world. She has a company. She was discussing her ideas very directly with a male owner of another company, and she was very direct. She's Dutch. She's very direct, and the guy felt threatened. He felt threatened, and she got upset. And another woman came to her afterwards to say, "You shouldn't have dealt with it that way. You were a bit aggressive." This is not perceived, and this is a bias. Okay, so we need to be very careful with the messages that we put out.
So this is very important, and also, let's say, men and women should be educated, and also in like this second degree, second order of biases, right? Okay, so let's open the floor for questions. There was one there. Maybe we need a microphone.
And I need my glasses because I can see.
Hola, por favor, puedes acercar el micrófono.
Hello, I'm Monica Dietl from Initiative for Science in Europe. I took the position Marco left. So, hi, Marco. Thank you very much for all these interventions. In fact, what I wanted to say was said by the last speaker. Sorry, I didn't retain your name, but one of the problems we have in all these panels like today is that there are no men or little number of men. And of course, we have to associate men to all these discussions. The second thing you said too, finally, so when I raised my hand, is the bias we women have ourselves. And the third point I wanted to say, and we have to work on, of course, on our own biases. And the third thing you mentioned, education. I think it's important that we start by when we have children, or we have nephews or whatever, that we start by speaking to the young children about that. So that we teach those, because I see, I'm much older than you are, that the problems I had when I was in your period of careers still persist. So we didn't succeed, and I believe it is, because I remember having participated to panels and whatever. I remember once I was in a women event in Brussels, organized by the Commission. The only man was the head of unit in charge of gender balance. The only man, about 100 people. Yes. And in the table I said, I think we're missing men here. I was just aggressed by the other women. So we have really to be self-critic. So it was not a question, it was some comments. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very good point, thank you.
Thank you very much, brilliant panel. My name is Nadia Matoui, I'm the chair of Genders, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. I have combined maybe 3 questions, but I'll try to make it digest. Reacting on a lot of keywords that I really liked. So for instance, Maria, when you said about the need for acknowledgement and recognition and validation. Sara, when you mentioned the boys club. When allyship was mentioned, and when the environment, not having to struggle against an environment, I wanted to have your thoughts about allyship on terms of women as well. I hear a lot about this idea of sponsorship and mentoring in companies, and how, what do you think about it, and how can we also train people to do it in the deciding rooms when we have 1 or 2 women who access there, how to fight this queen bee idea and kind of, how do you say, ease the ladder for other competent women to also climb. But the second question is about transparency. I love the idea a lot, but do you have any thoughts on how to make it kind more enforceable, whether it's through policies or incentives? And the third question is about, if my mind serves me well, what do you think about the quota system? A while ago, it was the only thing I would hear about, and I liked it a lot because it is needed. It is a good boost towards at least ensuring underrepresented categories to access some posts, indeed to change the decision layer. But I feel like it disappeared since in the last 2 to 3 years, nobody's talking about its importance anymore. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadia. Who wants to take on the question, one of the questions?
I can take the sponsorship one. I can, related to the sponsorship, I think that is a good, these are normally, I'm going to put my glasses, otherwise I can't see you. Those are normally known, or at least shown so far. I think, again, I'm going to bang on the fact that we actually need the evidence, because otherwise we just go with assumptions, and I think that's very dangerous. But I think from what we know so far, those programs work. And I think it is important, especially on companies, on consolidated companies that exist with a certain type of culture. And I think it is at the level of the company to set those up in sponsorship programs within the company. That has been shown in the US and in Canada to work, and especially with women and women of color, because that has it's an extra layer of complexity there, and it's very, very relevant to the environments. So I think it's a good action. I don't know enough, but I think it's definitely, from what I know, something that can work, and I would support, definitely. Transparency, I think I'll leave Nehama to reply.
So one thing about transparency is a lot of information is actually public. So on Twitter, there's a bot that tells you how much women and men earn in any given organization. So on Women's Day, I can't remember, all these people were like, we love women, you know, we're so equal. And then the bot would come up and be like, women are paid 23.5% less in this organization. So that's the kind of thing that we can do, even, for example, across universities, because each university does their hiring and promotion separately, and it's a very non-transparent process. So one thing you could do is have diversity in the actual committees that do this, which I think helps. Another thing is that the universities should be accountable, and they're not probably motivated to collect and publish that data themselves, but the data can be found. And if you had a ranking system in academia, for example, for each university, how many women were hired in each department last year, how long does it take to be promoted for each stage for women versus men, then it would work in the sense that it would shame. Like, you would know that you were like worse than the norm as a university, and then maybe a good candidate might not come to you. So I really strongly believe in financial incentives. So for a university, it just becomes another incentive to change, because otherwise they have no real motivation to change. So that kind of transparency.
Maybe I can add one short comment on the collaboration. I very much agree. I think this is essential, and listening to many of the sort of problems outlined and suggestions, for example, the transparency, I can only think that I think there would also be many men or others that would benefit from this. Looking at gender being more fluid these days as well, I think there's also people that would identify them somewhere in the middle that would benefit a lot more from having a transparent scoring system that is equal for everyone, right? So I think that is something that we can only achieve together, working with everyone in this world rather than only one gender or the other.
Thank you. Who wants to take on the quota?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but there was something about the queen bees and in general the bias that also the women who made it to the top have. So like we discussed before, I think, of course, we have to work on the bias that is also present in the women. But one thing that I would like to see happening, maybe long term, maybe it won't happen immediately, is more of role models that are not the alpha males and the cookie cutter sort of products of the very brilliant careers in industry or in research, and from which also men would benefit. So if we, maybe one way of bringing men more into the topic is to highlight the male leaders that have not the standard stereotypic careers and way of thinking, and highlight that they are doing well, and sort of bring focus less from just being that the female perspective and style is different, but more towards flexibility and diversity that we mentioned. So bring also the male part of our environment that doesn't want to be the Superman or the Superwoman, and I think in some cases the role models that we have for women, which are the superwomen, the superheroes, that they're doing everything, the family, the company, everything at once, while achieving great results. I think this is sometimes also discouraging. So not everybody can do that, and in real life there are compromises. And so the women that are seen now at the top, the super women, are probably due to the survivorship bias. So they are actually doing better than men because they were selected by a higher pressure.
I'll just comment one more thing related to that. So I also read that there's another evidence out there that actually women suffer a lot more burnout than men. And I won't say a lot more, but I think it's about 45% for women and about 32% for men, precisely because they feel they have to accomplish it all, and because they feel a lot more responsibility for their peers, and I think it's historical. I mean, women have an history that is different from men. So I think we have to be very careful with this, because I think this is also then what impacts in the dropping off and quitting from certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So I'm just having a look at the time, and I think it's almost time to close this session. I just wanted to ask Jeroen to have a final word on what has been said before related to the, let's say, more engagement of men into gender equality. Because I remember that we had a conversation last week where you said the new generation actually are more aware of this. What do you think?
Yeah, I do believe that there is a shift happening. If I look at, my own bachelor, that was terrible in terms of gender balance, and looking at the things that we're doing now, primarily within the EIT ecosystem. And there I also realized that I may be a little bit biased just seeing that side of it. But there are many programs and initiatives that really change, educate school children, that go out and set up master programs, PhD programs, separate investment funds, and these sorts of things, really to change the perception and the culture in the young people. So maybe I'm too hopeful, but I do believe that in some years, things are likely only to be improved. I think we need to be hopeful somehow, otherwise it's a dark society that we live in. But yeah, working together really helps. For me also the best practices, and I will not take too much time, but are really around, creating programs where people can come together in different ages and have these communities where people can, rely on support, find each other, have a connection, have someone that can help, that went through it. And bit by bit create more examples, more role models of people that are in these places and having a healthy work-life balance in achieving these great things. And I think, to make a little bit of PR, I think our EIT alumni community is doing very well in that, in bringing people together and creating a nice environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is very good. Thank you for the EIT Alumni Day.
MCAA as well, huh?
I think so, yeah. We always try to have balanced panels and all this stuff, right? And I must say that actually a few years ago I was organizing a panel, and I invited a man to the panel, and the guy told me, I'm very interested in participating in this session, but I will come only if the panel is balanced. And it was the first time that it happened to me, and I think that it is a very good way in kind of encouraging people and other, let's say, people to kind of enforce a bit of gender balance also in panels or events or whatever it is. Okay, so it's an easy thing to do, and it doesn't cost much, but actually it's very powerful. Okay, so I would like to thank all our panelists. Thank you. The time has flown. I wanted to ask more questions and do more things, but it's fine like that. And thank you also the attendees. Goodbye.
Murat had a question. Murat had a question. Can you ask the question? You had a question? Ask the question, ask the question. You are the only man here, I think.
No, there is another one.
Okay, two.
I think one of the important things is about the communication, the language.
Yeah.
So the way the woman's brain totally works is different than the men. So, and but here, this is not something bad, this is something like entrepreneurship. But I think this is one of the important things to investigate how men and women can the way to communicate. That